Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasami. This evening we chanted the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which is believed to be the first teaching of the Buddha, in which he lays out the Four Noble Truths in detail and mentions the Noble Eightfold Path in brief. Yeah, it's good to chant it. I'd already been planning to speak on that topic before I knew what the chanting was. And so I think many people know I spent nearly 2 months in the United States and got back a little over a week ago. And I spent nearly 4 weeks in Seattle, where my entire family lives. And I had the opportunity to go alms round quite a few days at Pike's Place Market with Ajahn Nisabo and Ajahn Kovilo. So, this visit felt different than other visits because I was it felt like being a samana in Seattle and getting to know the city the way that a monk does, walking in hours, alms round, and seeing the same. It was interesting. One learns that when you keep the same schedule, I showed up at the same time, and I would see, several times, I'd pass the same people doing the same things. So for instance, every time there was this, or nearly every time there was a group of the Pike Lakes Market employees doing their stretching in the morning, and so I'd walk past a group of employees every time. And seeing, just interesting to notice what people, the morning routine, and being a part of it. My father explained that if you do that long enough, people will recognize that you're safe and be willing to talk with you. So that was, anyway, very, very much appreciated the time in Seattle. And my parents are both Dhamma practitioners and committed long-term Dhamma practitioners. And so I had many conversations with them about different aspects of Dhamma. And my father has been reading dozens of management books lately. And so we talked about the ones that he appreciates most, and the one we talked about in particular was one called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And I remember on a walk hashing out with my father, trying to figure out whether the Four Noble Truths would sort of fit into the pattern of what the author of Good Strategy considers a good strategy. And after some pondering, we thought, yeah, it really does. So I thought I would talk a bit about that. It's always useful to look at our familiar teachings from somewhat different perspectives. But I'll begin with the caveat that these many management books seem to have this assumption that basically the ultimate good, is contributing to sort of the performance of your company. And I feel a little bit uncomfortable, well, more than a little bit uncomfortable with that premise, because I'm not sure that my own sense is that our society has benefited greatly from the performance of companies, but companies performing even better, I'm not sure will bring additional benefit. I don't know, but just noted. On the other hand, the Noble Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths are, one of the things that makes them noble is that one who follows them benefits themselves and benefits others simultaneously. Anyone who's actually following the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, as explained by the Buddha, is someone who is not harming themselves, not harming others, and generally bringing a great deal of good into the world. And there's a great deal of reflectivity involved to make sure that's the case. And so, I don't know, companies are not always so noble, but what my father and I talked about was the same sort of principles that for good strategy for a business also work in Dhamma practice, it seems. And the Buddha himself was a superb strategist. He, in the beginning, our texts report that he was a bit unsure about whether it made sense for him to teach or not. And the verse that Kelly recited was the Anagarika Kelly recited was the verse of Brahma Sahampati asking the Buddha to please teach the Dhamma. There are beings who have little dust in their eyes who will be able to understand. And so once the Buddha decided that he wanted to teach Dhamma, he quickly came out with a brilliant strategy that, according to the texts, landed, in about 2 years he had, according to the text, something at least 1,500 fully awakened disciples, which is really amazing. India was much smaller than we are now. Imagine if that happened in England. If Ajahn Sumedho had landed in England, and 2 years later he had 1,500 awakened disciples. The Buddha was effective, at least according to the texts. And so, the beginning point of a good strategy, there's 3 points. The book tries to be, I haven't read it, but my father's explanation, and a bit online, the book tries to be very simple, because that simplicity is certainly a benefit. Complexity can often obscure poor thinking. And so, just 3 points as to what makes a good strategy. And the first is an accurate diagnosis of what is preventing one from, in the case of a company, why your company would be not performing as well as it could be. In the case of the Buddha's teachings, it's, what's identifying diagnosing the problem with life, what is, and even the Buddha's diagnosis as First Noble Truth, there is dukkha, is actually just that is actually a very significant step, because one thing that this Good Strategy, Bad Strategy book suggests is that it's actually, when you choosing strategy, you're making choices. You're doing this and not that. And there's other ways to formulate the problem. That the Buddha, when the Buddha says idang dukkang, there's other ways. And in fact, the Buddha's approach is unusual, certainly in Western culture. And I don't know Eastern societies well enough to be able to say. But typically, Western culture tends to approach the world through idealism. And so the problem with the world is that there's a way the world should be, and it's not that way. The problem with me is there's a way I should be, and I'm not that way. And so then what you do is the diagnosis is, well, basically, what should I be? What and how am I falling short of that? And it can be helpful to realize just how deep this is. This is not to recognize, for instance, when I after I've been not paying attention for a while and then come back to, oh right, I'm practicing Dhamma, I got off, what's going on? And so often it's like, well, my first impulse is to compare myself against an ideal of the kind of Dhamma practitioner I think I should be. That's not practicing the Four Noble Truths. It's very helpful to recognize that, that's not coming back to the Four Noble Truths. Even though it might seem like, okay, now I'm, woke up. I was lost in some train of thought. Now I come back, okay, what should I be? What should I be thinking about? That's not the Four Noble Truths. Or at least certainly not the first one. And similarly, and in our culture, we also have, the myths behind our culture. Just from Genesis, the idea that, God created the world, and in the beginning, there was a good world. The Garden of Eden was this perfect creation, and then, in a very short nutshell, human beings mess it up, and then the problem is that we got kicked out of Eden, and then there's this sense that, well, maybe how do we get back? How do we rectify that? And again, and in various versions of the story, God has different plans for how to do that. And so what we should do is we should accord with that plan. Which makes sense if that's your belief system, but many of us have set that aside. But I would suggest that our thinking in terms of how much we compare the world and ourselves to an ideal remains the same, even though we perhaps no longer accept the underlying story, the underlying myth. Our habits remain, and our culture very much reinforces this. So it's very, very helpful to recognize, at least in terms of the Four Noble Truths, what bad strategy is. And then the next element of a good strategy is, after the diagnosis, is a coherent approach to how what are you going to do to address that problem? And again, this is a place where you're making choices. There are things there, and so the Buddha in the Four Noble Truths, second noble truth is that craving is the tanha, craving is the cause of suffering. So dukkha has been identified, and then there is this craving which is its cause. Actually, just to back up a little bit more about dukkha itself, my understanding is that the Buddha never actually defines what dukkha is in the Pali Canon. It's a broad term. It's, at least to me, my understanding is that one thing is it's a subjective experience. It's not an objective reality. And so things that seem to be, say, really good from the outside, the person experiencing it can still be experiencing lots of dukkha, and vice versa. So it's a focus on looking at dukkha is a focus on the subjective experience, what's going on now. And it ranges from everything from really intense suffering to just very subtle shades of not rightness. So this experience is where the Buddha suggests is both the problem and what to do about it, as we chanted, is that dukkha is to be understood. So this is to be investigated. This is where the First Noble Truth is really looking at that clearly. That experience of what does unsatisfactoriness feel like? And not being afraid to experience it instead of running off. So, as I was saying, the second noble truth is that tanha, craving, is the cause of dukkha. And what's helpful to think about this strategically is all the other things that are also causes of dukkha or conditions. There's lots of things. There's lots of causes and conditions for any given experience. And so, for example, if you're hungry and you're experiencing, you want food, definitely that unpleasant experience has causes of what? Not having food, and even more fundamentally, just having a body that needs food in the first place. So there's lots of and oftentimes we tend to focus on the external causes. If only I could get what I want, then I won't suffer. And what I want can range from all sorts of, wealth, status, praise, but also even just, getting my robes sewn, learning how to do this chanting, giving you a Dhamma talk. All these things are, if only I could get things the way I wanted to, then I wouldn't suffer. And that's certainly one approach to trying to put an end to suffering. But again, from the point of view of the Noble Truth, that's bad strategy. The Buddha points tanha is the cause of dukkha that you want to focus on, because that's the one that you actually have control over and can actually have eventually full control over. That can be, the Buddha says, that can be abandoned, is the teaching of what to do with the second noble truth, and then noticing, not only is it to be abandoned, it has been abandoned, let go of. That's where the leverage point is. It's not in changing the physical conditions of the world, or in some ways even trying to make the mind better. We do need to improve conditions, but that's actually the operation of the fourth noble truth, which I'll get to a bit later. But notice that the fundamental solution is not in the conditions. And again, useful to tanha, unlike dukkha, tanha gets a definition even in the dukkha has examples. Tanha, craving for sensual pleasure, craving for becoming, and craving for non-becoming. And the sensual pleasure is it's powerful craving, but it's relatively simple to see. The craving to become and craving not to become are more subtle and often get us more subtly tangled. The desire to be a person in a world, that's the becoming. And then the specifics are what kind of person in what kind of world. And the varieties are endless. But when one recognizes that, that inclination to, this is more or less what I was talking about earlier, that inclination to figure out what I should be and what the world should be, and then crave it. If it was like that, then I wouldn't suffer. But that's constructing those ideals is actually, in this analysis, part of the problem, not part of the solution. And so the third component of a good strategy is a coherent plan to implement that solution in order to address the problem. And that the fourth noble truth, the Noble Eightfold Path, is indeed a very coherent plan. And this is where you end up changing self and changing conditions. It starts with a right understanding. Right view is actually one view. There's two aspects of right view. One is just the sort of view that would make you interested to practice a spiritual life in the first place. Understanding that actions have results, most fundamentally, and that good actions have results. And the second formulation of right view is understanding the world in terms of these Four Noble Truths. So the Noble Eightfold Path begins with that understanding, and then its other components, right intention, the aspirations you want to have in order to realize these teachings. Renunciation, the idea that it's attitude of not aiming to acquire, aiming to simplify, and then goodwill and non-harming. That the nobility of this path, recognizing that it isn't unlike a business which is trying to beat its competitors, regardless of how the competitors feel about it. The Noble Eightfold Path is aimed at practicing for the welfare of oneself, the welfare of others, and finding the strategy that means that those are not in conflict. And then right speech, right action, right livelihood. These are the teachings on virtue, conduct, bringing one's conduct in line with what is needed to practice this path. And then finally the right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration are the tools to develop the mind. And right effort in particular is strategic, because it isn't like how much meditation should you do every day, or even should you meditate at all. The definition of right effort is it's fourfold, making an effort so that unarisen, unskillful qualities do not arise. Then 2, for those, if unskillful qualities have arisen, making an effort to abandon them. And then 3, making an effort to develop skillful qualities that have not yet arisen. And 4, making an effort to bring to completion those skillful qualities that have arisen. So rather than specifying exact actions, this is saying, right effort says, pay attention to the results. You've got the tools that are described in the rest of the Noble Eightfold Path, but which ones you use and how you use them depends on the feedback loop. Learn what a skillful state of mind feels like from the inside. And then pay attention to what actions bring about those states of mind. So, overall, I remember when my father and I walking together and sort of, this is more detail than we hashed out, but just realizing how great a similarity there was between this management book and the Buddha's strategy for putting an end to suffering. Then I guess I haven't spoken about the one I didn't mention was the third noble truth, which is the truth of the cessation of dukkha. So, which again, it's a subjective. It's not, cessation of dukkha is not an objective experience, and then it can be realized, and then it has been realized, and this happens at all levels. Just being aware of the cessation of even little, just even little bits of dukkha. What's that like? What's it like to let go of an impulsive desire and then feel the peace that comes in the wake of that? What's it like to, when, say, I notice okay, right, let's pay attention here, and then my first thought goes to, okay, how should I be? And then it's, I don't think that's a skillful question. Maybe let's try some space here. Pay attention to the body. Say, no need to try to figure. Don't try to figure things out first. What's the experience like right now? And there, I've just seen letting go of that impulse to figure out, to try to find out, just come up with some way that I should be, and then try to evaluate how much my behavior did or didn't fit with that. Just what's the experience of, when that ceases, what's the experience like? And that's, but this, the Buddha's, from his own experience, he recognized just how far this cessation of dukkha can go. And that, one very dramatic example of the independence of this, how independent the mind can be of the physical circumstances is that of Ajahn Chah in his later years. Ajahn Chah was bedridden for roughly the last 10 years of his life and wasn't speaking, and the monks were taking care of him. And this was not a condition that anyone would want to be in. He sure didn't want to be in that condition, but that was what he got. His body was neither going to die nor recover. And I never met Lumpur Cha in that state. I think it's possible that some people here have, but my understanding is that many of those around him were fairly confident that he wasn't suffering much. And certainly when they brought monks with psychic abilities in, that was their opinion. Basically, oh, he's fine, I'm worried about all of you. It was the opinion of one of them. So, and there is that possibility. And that's why this particular, and the Buddha's assertion is that this particular strategy for addressing dukkha and just addressing the general problem of life, being stuck here and being this embodied experience, what do we do with this? Because it's not, without a narrative from, say, a creation myth or something like that, it's not clear at all what to do. And people have all sorts of different approaches to this, and one can get one can get pretty confused. And the Buddha suggests, here's something you can do that is truly noble and can take one a really long way. And this is something to, it's really useful to contemplate the benefits of this. I mean, I think my parents, for example, will say quite frequently to each other, thank goodness for the Dharma. It's a common phrase. They don't quite know they don't know how they would approach life without this, but thank goodness for the Dharma. There's a way to approach life that is internally coherent, makes a great deal of sense, but also really, really meets the desires of the heart. It's not primarily about the intellect. Dukkha is not an intellectual problem. Dukkha is a felt, experienced, embodied problem. And the Four Noble Truths, Noble Eightfold Path, are a felt, experienced, embodied strategic solution to what in the world do we do with this? And so please take whatever is useful here and leave aside what isn't. And I'll close here for the night. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.